I think it's the smallest of the King's departments, but I think because of that, it creates this very lovely atmosphere. I feel like I've had a chance to get to know my professors quite well.
There's a lot more freedom when it comes to going in your own direction with an EMSP degree. Like, you really pick and choose what you want to do.
I really love the golden age of piracy, learning about it. That's what I'm doing my thesis on, as well as like the French Revolution, Tudor England.
I mean, yeah, just reading all these fascinating texts, philosophical and fictional and historical.
No matter what I do or where I go, I feel like it's all very transferable skills.
Those are some students in the Early Modern Studies program at the University of King's College in Halifax, and they're sounding pretty enthusiastic. Welcome back to This is King's podcast, where we explore all things King's. I'm Pauline Dakin. I teach here in the School of Journalism, Writing and Publishing. And this season, we're exploring the various programs of study here at King's. We're meeting the directors of the programs and hearing about what's being taught and how that connects to the world around us. Today, Simon Koo is here. He's the director of the Early Modern Studies program, which covers the big ideas and the key figures of the early modern period, from the 16th to the 19th centuries. Simon, welcome.
Thank you.
You grew up in Britain and Calgary. You studied in Ottawa and at the University of Toronto. What brought you to King's?
Well, like a lot of academics, doing my PhD while I was working on my dissertation, the job ad appeared, I think it was an email notice or something back in those days. This is the early 2000s. And there was a position that fit my own work in early modern political thought. And so I thought I would give it a try and apply. I had never heard of King's, so I didn't know anything about it. But I thought at least it would be a good interview experience, even if I didn't get the position.
Seems to have worked out.
It does seem to have worked out. In fact, I was told by a grad student at Dalhousie, who was a friend of mine, that it was a fix, that there was someone that they were going to hire, an internal candidate. Turned out that rumor was totally false, as graduate student rumors tend to be. And it gave me a lot of confidence in the interview, because I thought, well, I'm not getting this job, so I might as well be completely relaxed and tell too many jokes and so on. And so I think that actually worked in my favor, not thinking I would get the job.
You came to early modern studies through political science. You're a political scientist.
I would say political theorist.
Theorist, okay.
Just out of respect for my fellow social scientists, even in my political science degrees, I had veered towards political theory, and in particular the history of political thought. And I found myself drawn towards the early modern period. Within political science circles, I mean, I think political theory is respected, but often seen as a little bit eccentric, because we do read very strange books from the past in political theory, and especially early modern or ancient or medieval. So even then, I had a kind of humanities orientation in my degree, and I ended up doing my dissertation on Hobbes, who is very much a canonical political philosopher from the 17th century, but comparing him with Milton, who is not normally read by political theorists, and looking a lot at Milton's poetry. So my work had already become interdisciplinary, and that kind of set me up to fit into a place like King's and EMSP in particular.
Mm-hmm. And you say you were drawn to the early modern studies.
Yeah.
What was it about them that drew you?
Yeah, so I think like a lot of our students who end up in early modern studies, they find the texts and the period fascinating. And in particular, I like the ways in which the early modern period is very much a transitional period between the Middle Ages and the modern world. Sometimes I think of it, because I'm also a science fiction geek in many ways, like a sort of alternative world or a parallel universe, familiar like our own, but also distant from it. So we can see the roots of many aspects of modern life and culture, but it's also alien. And that kind of mixture of the alien and familiar drew me to the early modern period. And I think that's what draws a lot of students too. Yeah.
So the Early Modern Studies program just celebrated its 25th anniversary last year.
Yes.
What led to its creation?
So in the late 90s, there was an effort to think of ways in which King's students, after their first year studying in foundation year program, could find maybe similar kinds of courses or continue their studies at King's while also taking courses and degree options at Dalhousie. The Middle Ages was largely covered by the Classics Department at Dalhousie, and so the idea was generated, well, what about a program devoted to the early modern period in particular?
Mm-hmm. How unique is it in this region?
I think it's totally unique. In fact, I think it's the only dedicated early modern studies program in Canada, possibly in North America, in the sense that if you look at other universities, they may have early modern studies or medieval and early modern studies programs, and these are usually programs that are kind of put together, cobbled together from courses in different existing disciplines. And to have a program which has its own course number and its own dedicated courses to the early modern period and the courses themselves be interdisciplinary is unique in the Canadian context.
I'm going to ask you about some of the courses, but I first want to ask you, this was a period, as you say, of real transition.
Yes.
So what are some of the major themes, I guess, that make this such a rich area of study? And I'm thinking about all that was going on in the arts and science and politics and so on.
That's right. Yeah, so the time period that we deal with begins basically with the Renaissance, particularly in Italy and also other parts of Europe, and ends with the French Revolution and its long aftermath in the Napoleonic Wars. So there's a lot of conflict that happens in this period, including wars of religion, which break out by the 16th and 17th centuries between Protestants and Catholics, roughly speaking, and the most devastating of which is the 30 Years' War, which decreased the population of the German states by about 1/3 after 30 years of conflict. And also colonial conflicts that break out, especially by the 18th century, as Europeans are expanding overseas. And in this context of conflict, but not only in Europe, also overseas, there's a dynastic change in China from the Ming to the Qing dynasties. The Mughals take over in India in the 16th century, and then the British displace them by the 18th century. In periods of conflict and war, you also often see intellectual ferment, a kind of burst of new ideas, new cultural expressions to respond to those rapid changes. So culturally, in the visual arts, you have a return to some ancient modes of painting and sculpture in order to create new forms of art, and that's very much true of Renaissance art. And also, of course, new ideas about the self, about human beings' relationship to nature and to society, and we are living with the legacy of those changes, positive and negative.
Mm-hmm. And we often refer back to them in our current culture too.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So I was just at a general tutorial in the foundation year program where Machiavelli was brought up, and of course Machiavelli is an important aspect of important thinker in several of our courses, and of course the idea of Machiavellian power politics is still very much with us today, and it's interesting to compare with the ways Machiavellianism may be cited today with Machiavelli's own works. And so we're very much devoted to analyzing primary sources in their context and seeing some of also the misunderstandings of the early modern period while they're also very much alive too.
My impression is that the program has broadened from looking quite closely at
Yes.
Europe, and you mentioned China, that it now is taking a much more kind of worldly look
Yeah.
at that whole era. How did that come about?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's from hiring people who are sort of interested in expanding our view of the early modern period. And of course, there are lots of internal developments to Europe, but even the definition of what counts as Europe has been questioned quite rightly by historians. The Ottomans, for example, occupy basically most of Eastern Europe and the Balkans by the 16th century. So throughout the early modern period, the Ottoman Empire is part of Europe, right? So how do we need to kind of consider them. But there's also a recognition, and those of us who have been hired into the program and teaching courses have seen ways in which what happens in Europe is often profoundly affected by what is happening outside of the borders of Europe. And in recognition that this is also a period of intense overseas imperialism, colonialism, as well as trade and commerce. So we can't even think about Europe in the early modern period without seeing Europe in the context of a wider world, and also maybe comparing what happens in Europe with developments that might not be connected to what's going on in Europe. So I find that very fruitful in my own teaching, and it's true for my colleagues. My colleague Justina Spencer, who's an art historian in the program, is very much interested in global encounters in early modern art and seeing the ways in which artistic expressions and styles are influenced by the wider world and influence the wider world at the same time. And there's often a movement back and forth, quite a complex movement, an interesting movement.
And you have just published the second in a series looking at China and the Enlightenment.
Yes, that's right. While teaching in early modern studies, I developed this interest. I kept coming up with references to China in works of Enlightenment thinkers from the late 17th century throughout the 18th century. And I thought, okay, this is going to be part of my teaching, and then it became a big research project for me, and then led to these two books, China and Early Enlightenment Political Thought, which was published in 2016, 2017, and then China and Later Enlightenment Political Thought, which was published just now in November 2025. And so this research was very much born out of the kind of interdisciplinary work that I was doing in my teaching in early modern studies, sparking my curiosity and being in an environment that fostered that sort of examination of cross-cultural connections.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
What are some of the core courses for the program?
Yeah, so I mean, I teach a course on piracy. It's my most popular course for some reason. And the pirates of the early modern period obviously have they're familiar to us in popular culture. And we have pirates now. So it's interesting to kind of compare modern pirates with pirates of the past, and what can we learn about piracy in the contemporary world by looking at the history of piracy, and in particular the early modern period, which was a very fertile period for pirates. Our most popular course in EMSP is undoubtedly witchcraft, a course on witchcraft in early modern Europe, and that looks at, of course, the phenomenon of witchcraft, the witch trials, and Catherine Morris, my colleague who teaches that course, very much situates the phenomenon of witches and witch trials in Europe and in North America in the context of women's history, of changing conceptions of women, looking at women who were accused of being witches at the same time as this is the period of what we now call the scientific revolution. So what's going on there? How can we attribute this kind of spike in these sorts of accusations that we would connect to superstition, right? She also teaches a course on the vampire, which is cross-listed with contemporary studies, and many of our courses are cross-listed, which looks at the phenomenon and the view of vampires, particularly from the 16th, 17th, and especially 18th centuries to the modern period and all of the modern expressions of vampirism. We also have courses, many courses on art history. And in fact, I would say almost half of all of the art history courses taught at Dalhousie and King's are actually in the early modern studies program. Many of them are cross-listed with Dalhousie and other programs at King's, looking at different aspects of Renaissance and Baroque art and different forms of visual perspective and illusionism in the early modern period. And then we have other courses that deal with aspects of sex and gender and different facets of early modern political theory and early modern philosophy and conceptions of the self and so on.
And for some years, students were able to go and see firsthand some of the art of the period.
That's right.
They went to Florence.
That's right. Yes. So that was offered, I think, 3 or 4 times. It was a course designed by Jeanette Vucic, a former colleague in EMSP, who basically and single-handedly created a field course to study abroad in Florence for a whole month and look at the art, politics, and culture of Renaissance Italy with classes that would include lectures and activities, but also visiting galleries, of course, and museums, and just experiencing Florence, which is a kind of beautifully preserved city from the Renaissance period, and that fell into abeyance, particularly because of COVID, and Dr. Vucic left King's, and then Justina Spencer was hired to teach the art history courses, and now she is going to be offering it next May in 2026.
Off they go again.
Yes.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
What an opportunity.
Yeah, indeed.
There is a student society around early modern studies. How active are they?
They are extremely active, right? I'm so impressed. I mean, they're doing so many things at once. So they, for example, they organized a trivia night in collaboration with the Contemporary Studies program. It was an EMSP versus CSP trivia night to see who dominates the 19th century. If I may say, it was a little embarrassing. 2 faculty members showed up, myself and my colleague Catherine Morris, and they told us, well, you can just form your own team, and then we won the trivia contest, which doesn't seem quite fair compared to all the student
Go profs.
So fortunately, they didn't give us the prize. They gave us certificates saying that we had won, but the prize went to a student group. And they're even organizing an informal lecture series to hear about different topics that they're interested in. They organize a conference. There's going to be one at the end of January, and we have bringing in an art historian from McGill, and we also will have an alumni workshop. So one of our graduates who's doing I think it's a paper making or bookbinding program at Queen's will be coming back at the end of January to conduct a workshop with our students. So they'll do some hands-on kind of early modern crafts, and they all will also organize workshops on things like printmaking and so on, and movie nights, also merchandise. So they've come up with
T-shirts
all sorts of T-shirts and sweatshirts,
Mm-hmm.
and ones that feature witchcraft, vampires, and pirates. I think they're thinking of designing a special coat of arms for the early modern studies program, which sounds pretty daunting to me, but they
fun.
are amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they also produce a journal, an undergraduate journal for the Early Modern Studies Society called Babel.
Mm-hmm. You know, our provincial government is really concerned with what students are learning at university right now and would like to see graduates more job ready, which seems like bad news for the liberal arts.
Yeah.
What do you say about that preoccupation with practical learning? And I put that up against the student experience you just described, which sounds quite wonderful, right?
Yes. So I don't think there's anything wrong with thinking about what can I do with my degree? Can it link to jobs and the labor market? I would have an issue with looking at university education in terms of, well, what skills can automatically translate into a job right after graduation. Most of our students go on to do graduate degrees, and then will enter the workforce. And even though early modern studies doesn't sound like something which is obviously immediately practical, our students have been able to do all sorts of things with their degree. Some of the most interesting examples of graduates, one of our graduates is Evnie Rosen, who has gone on to become an extremely successful comedy writer and actor, and she has written and often spoken about how important doing early modern studies was to helping her development as a successful comedy writer. Another graduate that I can think of is a fellow named Hugo Kitching. And Hugo did a degree in early modern studies. He wrote an honors thesis about an early 18th century French philosopher and traveler named the Baron de la Hontan, who spent time with the Huron in New France. And Hugo wrote an honors thesis that compared La Hontan with Rousseau. After he graduated, he went on a backpacking trip, retracing La Hontan's route by canoe. I mean, he was the most fit student I've ever had, I think.
Yeah.
Just kind of following that journey. And in the summers between his degree, he would spend time in Algonquin Park working with naturalists, and now he's a wildlife filmmaker. So he made that connection between his liberal arts degree in early modern studies and his work as a wildlife filmmaker. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But some others have gone into sciences, medicine, as well as banking and all sorts of different careers. In other words, that the humanities can really inform the kinds of graduates that we produce, and employers have told us, the graduates that they like the most are often from liberal arts backgrounds. The liberal arts or humanities component really rounds them out and makes them very thoughtful, critical workers and
critical thinkers.
And critical thinkers, that's right. And those turns out to be I don't know, I guess we'd call it soft skills or something like this, that translate extremely well into all sorts of different professions.
Yeah, I read that a philosophy undergraduate degree is one of the top degrees for Fortune 500 CEOs.
Yeah.
So, yeah, interesting. What do you think a world looks like if we don't have people who are studying those fields?
I think that would be most unfortunate. I mean, it's a bit like, if you've only kind of picked up on skills training, which is directly related to a particular line of work, that's very limiting. I mean, the modern work, most people, I think, change jobs something like 7 or 8 times at least in their career. So if you want a certain adaptability and flexibility, it would behoove you to have a broader degree from that point of view, and also being able to read and write effectively and think critically enables you to take on all sorts of occupations.
A lot more people may be thinking about flexibility as AI begins to take hold in the world.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And AI. So it's an interesting thing about AI. Of course, we're all having to adapt to this new environment. I mean, one of the things I've done in my one of my courses in EMSP, which has been it's a course on ideas of the sea and seafaring, is that I've generated AI essays using ChatGPT and then asking students to critique it based on what they've learned in the classroom and a discussion of the text and so on. And so far, it's worked extremely well. The students, I think, are feeling quite empowered that they can write much better essays than ChatGPT can produce, right? So AI can give you a very efficient, quick summary and a superficial comparison between text and that sort of thing. But there's a depth of thinking, and there's judgment that's just missing from a machine-generated response,
and sometimes accuracy.
And sometimes accuracy too, yeah. So even if it becomes more accurate, it'll still be missing something. But yes, you're right. It often does miss accuracy in that regard. And there are studies that have shown that there are cognitive decline associated with not using your brain and just relying on AI.
It's why none of us can remember phone numbers now, because they're programmed into our
Right.
phones.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Simon, it's been great to talk to you. Thanks for telling us about early
you're very
modern studies
welcome.
program. Yeah.
Thank you.
Simon Koo is the director of the Early Modern Studies program, and we'll post some links so you can find out more about that program in the episode notes. And check out our Instagram. Find us at This Is Kings Podcast. Thank you for listening. If you are a King's alum or student or just interested in campus life, follow us and give us a like. We drop a new episode on the usual streaming platforms roughly every month during the academic year. I'm Pauline Dakin. Thank you to my co-producer and technician, Mark Pinio, and our student assistant, Sarah Hamilton. And thanks to you for listening.